In 1872, a man named George Smith sat hunched over a clay tablet in the back rooms of the British Museum in London. Smith was not a trained scholar. He was a former banknote engraver who had taught himself to read cuneiform. That afternoon, he was piecing together fragments pulled from the ruins of Nineveh in modern Iraq. When he finally translated the passage in front of him, he reportedly leapt from his chair, began pulling off his clothes, and paced the room in a state the museum staff had never seen before. He had found the Babylonian flood story, but the tablet he was holding contained something else entirely, something scholars would need another century to fully understand. Buried in those wedge-shaped marks was the account of a god who built humanity with his own hands, watched one of them die for the very first time, and then went silent. The tablets that contain this story are real. You can see them today. They sit behind glass in the British Museum, catalogued, photographed, and published. They are known collectively as the Atra-Hasis, a name that translates roughly to the exceedingly wise. 3 tablets, over 1,200 lines of Akkadian cuneiform. The copies we have date to approximately 1700 BCE, but the traditions they record are far older. The scribes who carved these words were not composing fiction. They were transcribing something their civilization treated as foundational truth. In 1969, 2 Oxford scholars named W.G. Lambert and A.R. Millard published the first comprehensive critical edition of these tablets. Their translation revealed a narrative so detailed, so structurally coherent, that it reshaped how Assyriology understood Mesopotamian religion. This was not a hymn. It was not a prayer. It was a record of how the world became the way it is, and at the center of that record stands a god named Enki. Enki is not like the other gods of Mesopotamia. Every pantheon has its king, its warrior, its stormbringer. Enlil commanded. Anu presided from the heavens. Ishtar wielded desire and destruction in equal measure. But Enki operated differently. Thorkild Jacobsen, the Danish Assyriologist who spent decades at the University of Chicago mapping Mesopotamian religious thought, described Enki in his 1976 book, The Treasures of Darkness, as the god who solves rather than commands. His domain was the Abzu, the vast freshwater aquifer beneath the earth. His city was Eridu, the oldest settlement in Sumerian tradition, located in what is now southern Iraq, near the modern town of Abu Shahrain. Cylinder seals from the 3rd millennium BCE depict Enki seated on a throne with streams of water flowing from his shoulders. Fish swim around him. Plants spring from the ground at his feet. Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the most prolific Sumerologists of the 20th century, wrote that Enki is the only deity in the Sumerian pantheon consistently associated with the preservation of life rather than the taking of it. This distinction matters. It matters because Enki is the god who will build humanity, and it matters because of what that act will eventually cost him. The Atra-Hasis opens before humans exist, before cities, before agriculture, before death. In the beginning, the gods themselves performed all the physical labor of maintaining creation. A class of younger deities called the Igigi dug the canals that irrigated the land. They dredged the riverbeds. They hauled dirt from the channels of the Tigris and the Euphrates. Lambert and Millard's translation gives a specific duration for this labor: 3,600 years. The text uses that number deliberately. For 36 centuries, the Igigi worked without rest and without relief. And then they broke. The tablets describe what happened next in the language of organized rebellion. The Igigi burned their tools. They gathered in the night. They surrounded the dwelling of Enlil, chief among the gods. This is the oldest recorded labor strike in human literature. Enlil woke to find his compound encircled. He summoned Anu. He called the assembly. The gods debated what to do with their rebellious workforce, but there was no resolution. The Igigi would not return to work. The canals would silt. The rivers would flood. Creation itself would collapse without maintenance. This is when Enki stepped forward. Enki proposed something no other god had considered. Instead of punishing the Igigi, create something new, a new being. A worker species that would bear the yoke the gods found unbearable. The assembly agreed, but the method Enki described required a price none of them expected. A god had to die. The text names the victim, Wi-Ilu. Some tablets render the name Geshtu-e, a word that means ear or understanding. A god associated with intelligence and perception was chosen for slaughter. The Atra-Hasis does not describe a symbolic ritual. It describes a killing. Wi-Ilu was slaughtered in the assembly. His blood was drained and mixed with clay from the earth. Nintu, the mother goddess, shaped the mixture with her hands. 14 pieces of clay were pinched off. 7 became male. 7 became female. And from this compound of divine blood and earth and clay, the first human beings were formed. Jean Bottero, the French Assyriologist whose 1998 work, Religion in Ancient Mesopotamia, remains a standard reference, pointed out something crucial about this creation method. The divine blood component means that every human being carries within them a fragment of godhood. They are not purely mortal at this stage of the story. They are composite creatures, part earth, part divine. Enki designed them that way. There is another text that deepens this picture. It is called Enki and Nineveh, and it survives on Sumerian tablets held in museum collections in Philadelphia and London. Samuel Noah Kramer and John Meyer published their full translation in 1989 under the title Myths of Enki, the Crafty God. In this composition, Enki and the mother goddess Nineveh hold a contest after a feast. Nineveh, flushed with beer, begins shaping human beings with deliberate imperfections. She creates a man who cannot bend his hands. She creates a blind man. She creates one who cannot walk. Each time, Enki examines the flawed creation and finds it a role. The man who cannot grasp becomes a court attendant. The blind man becomes a musician. Enki turns every defect into a function. He refuses to discard what has been made. Then Enki takes his turn. He shapes a being of his own. And this one is different. The tablet describes a creature so frail, so incapable, that it cannot eat, cannot stand, cannot survive. Nineveh tries to help it. She cannot. The tablet breaks at this point. The ending is lost. But scholars who have studied the fragment read the failed creation as the prototype of mortality. Enki, the god who finds a purpose for every broken thing, created something he could not save. The Atra-Hasis continues past the creation. 1,200 years pass in the span of a few cuneiform lines. Humanity has multiplied. Cities have grown along the banks of the rivers. The canals function. The fields produce grain. The temples receive offerings. The system Enki designed is working. And this is precisely what triggers the crisis. The text uses a specific Akkadian word for the problem. Rigmu. It means noise. Clamor. The sound of too many voices. Humanity has become so numerous that the noise of their existence disturbs the gods. Enlil, in particular, cannot sleep. Stephanie Daly, in her Oxford translation, notes that rigmu in Mesopotamian literary context functions as a code word for overpopulation and unchecked growth. This is not a complaint about volume. It is a complaint about a system out of control. And Enlil's response is extermination. Not all at once, in stages. First, Enlil sends plague. The god Namtar, whose name means fate, releases disease across the human world. People sicken. People begin to die. But Enki acts. He finds Atra-Hasis, the wisest human, a man whose name means the exceedingly wise, and he tells him what to do. Enki instructs Atra-Hasis to direct every offering, every prayer, every sacrifice exclusively to Namtar. Overwhelm the plague god with devotion. The strategy works. Namtar, glutted on worship, lifts the disease. Humanity recovers. Enlil is not finished. He sends drought. Adad, the storm god, withholds rain. The rivers thin. The fields crack and harden. Enki intervenes again. He redirects worship to Adad. The rain returns. Enlil sends famine. Enki finds another way through. Benjamin Foster, whose anthology Before the Muses contains his own careful translation of these passages, reads Enki's interventions not as rebellion, but as procedural exploitation. Enki is not defying the divine assembly. He is finding loopholes in its decrees. He is a technician of sacred law, routing around commands he cannot openly oppose. Every time Enlil strikes, Enki parries. But the margin gets thinner with each cycle, and Enlil is watching. Enlil calls the assembly for a final time. He knows what Enki has been doing. He forces every god present to swear a binding oath. No deity may warn humanity of what comes next. No deity may intervene. The oath covers every form of communication. Enki swears it along with the others. The god who created humanity, who saved them from plague and drought and famine, who turned every broken thing into something with purpose, has just sworn not to protect them again. Enlil announces his final measure. He will send the flood. Total annihilation. No survivors. No loopholes. The waters will rise, and every human being will drown. But Enki is the god of cleverness, and what he does next is the single most famous passage in Mesopotamian literature. Enki walks to the house of Atra-Hasis. He cannot speak to the man. He swore the oath, so he speaks to the wall, the reed wall of the house. Enki addresses the woven reeds directly. He tells the wall that a great flood is coming. He tells the wall to tear itself down and build a boat. He tells the wall the dimensions. He tells the wall to seal the vessel with pitch. Atra-Hasis, standing on the other side, hears every word. Daly notes in her Oxford translation that this reed wall device appears in multiple independent versions of the Mesopotamian flood narrative across centuries of transmission. Scribes clearly regarded it as an essential detail, not an ornament. And what it reveals about Enki is devastating in its precision. He will not break his word. He swore the oath, and he will honor it. But he will bend the entire architecture of divine law until it cracks, just to save what he built. Atra-Hasis builds the boat. He loads his family. He loads animals and grain and craftsmen. The flood comes. 7 days and 7 nights, the waters rise. The storm howls across the plains between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Every city is submerged. Every field vanishes. Every human being not inside that vessel drowns. And when the storm finally breaks and the waters begin to recede, the gods themselves look down at what they have done. The text describes Nintu, the mother goddess who shaped the first humans from clay and blood, weeping. She cries out that her creatures have filled the sea like dragonflies floating on the surface. Her voice cracks across the cuneiform. Even Enlil is shaken. And then Atra-Hasis opens the vessel and makes a sacrifice on the mountaintop where the boat has come to rest. He burns cedar and myrtle. The smoke rises, and the gods swarm to the offering. The text uses a specific simile that appears across every surviving version of this story. The gods gathered around the sacrifice like flies. Andrew George, whose 2003 critical edition of the Gilgamesh epic at Oxford remains the standard scholarly text, notes that this image is deliberately humiliating. The gods are starving. There are no humans left to feed them offerings. They destroyed the labor force that sustained their own existence. They hover over the smoke of one man's sacrifice because they are desperate. The flood is over, but the crisis is not resolved. Humanity cannot be allowed to multiply unchecked again. The noise will return. The gods will lose sleep. The cycle will repeat. So the assembly convenes one final time. And what they decree in this session changes everything. Nintu, the same goddess who wept for her drowned creatures, establishes new rules. She creates the Pashittu, a demon that will snatch infants from their mothers. She establishes a class of women who will be unable to bear children. She institutes orders of priestesses who are forbidden from giving birth. These are population controls. Divine policy engineered to prevent humanity from ever growing beyond manageable numbers again. And then comes the final provision, the one that sits at the center of this entire story. Mortality. Humans will now die. Not of plague sent as punishment, not of flood sent as wrath. They will die because dying is now built into what they are. Jean Botero spent years analyzing this passage. His conclusion, published across multiple works, is unambiguous. Death in Mesopotamian theology is not a natural condition. It was not part of the original design. Humans were created from divine blood. They carried a fragment of the eternal within their bodies. Mortality was imposed after the flood as a deliberate engineering revision. A policy correction. The gods looked at what they had made, decided it was too successful, and added an expiration date. Consider what this means for Enki. He designed the original species. He mixed the blood of a slaughtered god with clay and breathed function into every form. He found a purpose for every flaw. He broke divine law through a reed wall to keep his creation alive. And now the assembly has changed the product. The beings he built to carry divine blood will now watch that blood drain from their children. They will bury each other in the earth they were made from. The composite creatures, part god and part clay, will come apart. And the tablets record something about Enki in the aftermath of this decree that scholars have struggled to fully interpret. He does not argue. He does not scheme. He does not find a loophole. For the first time in the entire Atra-Hasis cycle, the god of cleverness has nothing to say. Benjamin Foster, in his notes on the closing passages of Tablet 3, draws attention to the silence that follows the flood and the decree. The noise that defined the divine complaint is gone. Rigmu has been answered. Humanity is quiet now, and so is Enki. Tzvi Abush of Brandeis University published a study in 1998 examining what the divine blood component means for human death. His argument is haunting. When a human dies, the etemmu, the spirit component derived from the slaughtered god, descends into the underworld. Every death sends a fragment of divine substance into the realm of the dead. The gods do not simply lose a worker when a human dies, they lose a piece of themselves. Mortality is not just a population policy, it is a slow hemorrhage of the sacred. Peter Esbach, in his doctoral thesis at the University of Tartu, traced what happened to Enki in the centuries after these texts were composed. As Babylonian theology evolved and Marduk rose to supremacy, Enki was gradually sidelined. His attributes were absorbed. His stories were rewritten with Marduk at the center. Enki became Ea, an advisory figure, present in the assembly, but no longer decisive. Esbach reads this theological demotion as a narrative in itself. The god who cared most about humanity was the god who could least prevent their suffering. Wisdom was not enough. Cleverness was not enough. Enki could outwit plague and drought and famine and even the flood itself. But he could not outwit the assembly's final ruling. He could not engineer his way around death. The tablets are still in London. The cuneiform has been photographed, transcribed, digitized. Scholars continue to refine the grammar. New fragment joins occasionally surface from museum storerooms in Baghdad and Philadelphia and Berlin. The Atra-Hasis is not hidden. It is not suppressed. It has been published in academic journals for over 50 years. Anyone can read it. And what they will find, if they read carefully, is the story of a god who built something extraordinary from blood and clay, who fought for it against every force in the cosmos, who bent divine law through a wall made of reeds, and who, when the assembly finally imposed the one thing he could not reverse, stood in the silence of a world that would now bury its own. 3,700 years ago, a scribe in Babylon pressed a reed stylus into wet clay and recorded that silence. The tablet dried, the library burned, the sand covered everything, and the silence held.